Hey guys, welcome to the show. I can't believe it's already the third episode. Today, I have a very interesting and unique creator and builder. His name is Bisong, and he probably represents the perfect blend between a calmness and passion and service. All three of them combining into one unified both person and method of working and project. We're going to talk about a game called Sainthood that really represents what it means to serve in the Christian life and to grow your faith. And I'm super excited for this conversation to have with Bisong and about his process and how he runs his studio. So, hey, Bisong, thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and let's have a little conversation.
Yeah, I'm super excited because I like to talk to all kinds of different peoples, and you have a very unique personality in the sense that I feel like you're calm yet passionate at the same time. Why don't you give a quick intro about yourself and what you're working on, so the audience gets to know you a little bit?
Right. So yeah, my name is Bisong. I'm a Nigerian Canadian video game designer and filmmaker and software developer. I'm based in Canada, although I was born and raised in Nigeria. Grew up there my first 18 years, and then I got shipped over to Canada for university. And so yeah, I got into computer programming because or computer science as my degree, because it's easier to convince your African parents that you're going to go into video games via the technology route. My dad is a huge fan of technology, and so it was a much easier sell. So yeah, I studied computer science. I graduated, and then I got a job at a small independent video game company. Worked there for a few years, but then I had to leave because the hours were insane.
Mm,
Yeah, that's something you hear about the video game industry a lot, just the crunch.
mhm,
So I left that and I got a job at a payroll company, which is not as exciting, but it
mhm.
paid better and had a much better work-life balance, which allowed me to then make my own stuff on the side.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's a very interesting background. I come from Indian family, and it's the same thing. Everyone's either an engineer or a doctor,
Yeah.
so I know exactly what you're talking about. You have to kind of prove that you want to do something in the arts. So being an immigrant, actually, that's actually a really good place to start. A game developer from an immigrant family, you know, how does that feel? What is that journey like? I'd love to hear about like what that process was like. Were you always into games, or like did that grow over time? How was that like for you?
Yeah, so it started when I was in high school, I want to say. Well, I've always loved video games since as far back as I can remember.
Hmm.
Uh, Probably from grade 4, we used to sneak into the computer labs at
Hmm.
school to go play video games, and we'll sometimes get in trouble for that. So I've always loved playing video games. As for making them, that didn't come until high school when somebody brought a laptop to class
Hmm.
and showed us this really cool animation. Because I used to do animation on my textbooks, and I
Hmm.
would draw these little stick figures on each page, and I'll flip it, and it'll display this cool animation. So somebody brought a laptop to school and showed that animation could be done digitally, and it was these stick figures fighting. It was really cool.
Wow.
So I figured out that it was this program called Flash that was used to make that animation. So
Hmm.
I got Flash, got it on my computer, and started making animations in Flash. But then Flash also had a programming scripting language called ActionScript.
Hmm.
So I figured that out, and I started using that to make little games. So that's actually how I got started.
Wow. It actually is kind of interesting how the programs define the era that you're in. I actually
Yeah.
got started in that same time, so we all kind of grew up with the same kind of programs, Macromedia and
Yeah.
Flash, designing websites with Dreamweaver and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. Um, and so you were kind of introduced to gaming and at least game development through your friends' animation, right?
Mhm.
And was that something that was like an instant, like, oh wow, I would love to do this, or like did that click in your head, or was that just something you were experimenting with at the time?
Yeah, I mean, it was just cool.
Hmm.
Like, it's just cool to make stuff and see it displayed on screen. So, like you said, Dreamweaver, I use that too to make websites. It was just cool to make stuff. So I think that's where that came from.
Hmm.
Uh, and it wasn't video game specific because I was doing cartoon animations. There's this website, still exists actually. It's called Newgrounds, and
Hmm.
that's where many people submitted their Flash animations and video games. So
Hmm.
it was just cool to make stuff. I made websites, I made animations, and I made video games. And I'm kind of still juggling those two even
Of course.
now. The animation, I've flipped it to live action filmmaking just because my drawing skill is not, it reached its limit, let's say.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just love creating stuff.
Wow. Yeah, and that's I think like a common bond that I almost see with everyone that kind of comes on this podcast and talks about art, even from a faith perspective, and they just love creating, right? They love
Mhm.
building, they love creating things. So then you go to college and then you study computer programming. What was happening at that time? Were you kind of thinking that you want to go into some sort of corporate job, or was gaming or game development still in your head?
Oh yeah, corporate jobs were out of the question. The entire reason I
Hmm.
picked computer science was to work at a video game company. I wanted to make games. That
Hmm.
was it. That was the goal. It just so happened to be that programming was a way into the industry. I think
Hmm.
it would have been very difficult for me if games were made through just artistic talent, let's say, like
Hmm.
drawing skills or painting.
Yep.
But because programming had a wide application,
Hmm.
like I said, it was easy to convince my parents. So my parents just thought, yeah, he's going to study computer science. He can work at, Shell or whatever. But my personal goal was to work at a video game company. I used to watch videos from, the Xbox magazine and the PlayStation magazines,
Hmm.
and of the guys who made the games. And
Hmm.
it was just such a cool thing to do. So that was my
Wow.
number one goal. Yeah.
So what was like? What were some of the games that actually inspired you? Where like I'm sure that everyone has their favorite games. Was it RPGs or shooters? What were you like drawn to?
That's the thing, because I it's a difficult question to answer because I played such a wide variety of games. I
Hmm.
was thankfully exposed to all the consoles and PC games as a kid. So on PC, I would play games like Age of Empires and Roller
Hmm.
Coaster Tycoon, which were more, mouse heavy games. They were
Hmm.
strategy games. You wouldn't find those on console. On console, I played all the common ones: Super Mario on the Nintendo, all the Mario games, Mario Sports, Mario Tennis. On the PlayStation, I played Crash Bandicoot,
Crash Bandicoot,
and
yeah.
Jack and Daxter, and Siphon Filter, Metal Gear Solid, all the PlayStation classics, Grand Theft
Hmm.
Auto, the racing games, Need for Speed, Gran Turismo, every genre. And the RPG space, that was probably more in the PS2 era, where Star Ocean games came out, the Final
Hmm.
Fantasy games, even some obscure ones like Sudeki. I
Hmm.
saved money to buy that. So yeah, there was just a wide variety of games, all the platforms, all the consoles that I got to experience. So there isn't really any one game that I would say was the driving force.
Wow, that's like a huge variety, and I'm sure they all kind of like you probably have really fond memories of playing all of them. I myself am kind of the same. I played Nintendo, I played GameCube, I was pretty into Pokemon, but then I played Call of Duty and all kinds of different stuff. Just whatever I could find my hands on as a teenager. That's pretty
Yeah.
much what I did. um, so you're studying computer programming. By the way, I have a similar kind of background where I'm studying computer science, and you kind of have to balance a practical versus dream, right? So I know that
Yep.
you wanted to go towards game development. Um, did that mean that you were always thinking to kind of start a studio, or did that mean that you were saying I want to go work in the industry for a few years? How did you kind of think through that at that time?
Yeah, I think it was more so. I liked the idea of a mom and pop video game studio where,
Sure.
yeah, it's just me, a couple of folks running our own little shop, developing niche games for, an audience that is dedicated and consistent. I didn't really, I mean, when I was younger, I suppose it would have been cool to work on the next God of War or something. But
Hmm.
as I grew older, I liked that independent nature of just making my own stuff in my house or in my studio. So that was really the driving force. And actually, that was kind of a problem because I didn't do so well in school.
In
because I
college?
in college, yeah, in
Wow.
college,
Okay.
yeah, I didn't do it was really tough because the I guess I didn't care too much about programming concepts,
Hmm.
which is what a computer science degree prepares you for. I was more interested in just like the overall product of building a game, sound
Hmm.
design, game design, the arts, music, like the whole package. Whereas with the computer science degree, you're learning about data structures, algorithms, and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So there was kind of a mismatch there, and I found that really difficult throughout my time in university.
Yeah, and I think so a lot of programming is just kind of heavy with your mathematics and
Yeah.
your operating system concepts and things like that. But it does help to have that background, especially if you want to make these bigger projects.
Mhm.
It's interesting that you mentioned mom and pop kind of studio. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience actually kind of resonate with having that kind of thing. Was it independence? I think you mentioned independence as the biggest factor. So
Yeah.
talk to me about that. Why was that so important to you as opposed to something like AAA? You know?
Yeah. maybe it's because my parents owned their own businesses.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm not sure what drives that independent spirit. To be honest, my sister is kind of, even though they work for big companies, they also have their own small businesses. So maybe it's just a family thing. I also liked cartoons like, I don't know, Tom and Jerry, where they kind of owned an apartment or a condo. Some of the episodes, they would have the sky high rise
Hmm.
condo, and it was just theirs. And I just liked that idea of just owning your own thing. And
Interesting.
then folks like Tyler Perry would come out and say, yeah, I own my own studio and I write and direct and produce and distribute and all of
Hmm.
that stuff, and it's just his. So it was very appealing to me.
So it looks like you had some inspiration in that. I think a lot of people definitely feel that thing of I want to do my own ideas and I don't want to feel constricted by someone. And when there's too many people, too many chefs in the kitchen, you kind of lose that sense of idea. Did you already have a lot of ideas that you wanted to build? Were you always thinking of ideas even during college or post that you wanted to do? Is that part of the reason why you wanted to do independent?
Yeah, so and that's also, it can be a negative because as a creative person, all these ideas are bursting out, and
Hmm.
today there's something new and exciting. You just have to test it out, and then you abandon the previous ones, and nothing ever gets finished that way. So that was a problem I had, where I would have all these projects halfway done, a quarter way done, and I would kind of just get bored because I've jumped onto the new thing.
Hmm.
So to answer your question, yes,
Yeah.
that
Okay.
that is the reason.
That's awesome. I think you mentioned that you left college and then you were working initially in a studio. Is that
Mhm.
correct? You first
Yeah,
joined the studio. What was that like? What was that like? I know you kind of mentioned crunch, and we can talk
yeah.
about that next. But what was that like, kind of joining a studio? Was that kind of your dream job at that point?
Yeah, it was cool, and we worked on some cool projects too. Like one of the IPs I got to work on was the Warhammer franchise, and
I love those. Yeah.
yeah, they're great. And that particular game did so well that the the publisher of the big games,
Hmm.
they acquired that studio. I think they're called Frontier Games. So they
Yep.
eventually acquired that studio because we did such a great job on that Warhammer game. So it's something I'm proud of. It was pretty much all the stories you hear about, young kids in a studio sleeping on their desks. It was just a fun environment, lots of camaraderie, and
Hmm.
late nights, chips, burgers, the whole shebang.
Um. So you were working on the Warhammer franchise, which is a very well-known franchise. I think it's a mix of strategy, right? It's like a
Hmm.
strategy game.
Yeah,
And then now they have a first-person shooter, I think, that they
yeah.
released. But back in the day, it was Space Marines and those kinds of, yeah. Um, was it challenging at all, like with the workload itself? Not the quantity of work, but like, did you find yourself kind of using all that stuff from college in there? Where I assume you were a programmer,
Yeah,
so did you find yourself at home at that? Like, or did you find it was a little bit overwhelming to join, and work on that project?
yeah. I mean, graduating from college and joining any company would always be a little overwhelming because they already have a code base that they've been maintaining for some
Hmm.
time. So, and they would already have much more experienced programmers that have just way more sophisticated way of implementing things
Hmm.
that make your code look like,
Yep.
it humbles you.
Hmm.
So that was the thing that I appreciated the most there, because I really learned a lot about just systemic design and
Hmm.
code architecture and all of that stuff that I still use to this day,
Yep.
to my present day. So yeah, it was great.
Did you get to work on any of the engine layer stuff, or like what layer were you working? Were you working on primarily gameplay, or is there a particular thing that you're working on?
Yeah, so we used Unity, so we didn't really dive too much into customizing the Unity source code. It
Okay.
was mostly just implementing gameplay systems and UI, and we had some really smart guys
Hmm.
that would write shaders. Shaders require just a lot of math,
Yep. Yeah.
which
Quite
I'm
technical.
not. Yeah, I'm not great at. But yeah, so we had guys that would write custom shaders. We had guys that would write like animation systems so
Mhm.
that the animation would move according to the speed of the character, things
Mhm.
like that.
Okay. So you were part of a team, and then you're working, and I assume you kind of just this is in your 20s, so you're just kind of going at it and sleeping on the couch. You mentioned crunch, so a lot of people are kind of heard all kinds of stories about crunch, and every person is unique as far as how they relate with it. What was your experience like? Was that something that you felt was a big problem, or was that just you felt like was a necessity? It was maybe uncomfortable, but was a necessity? Like, how did you go about thinking about it?
At the time, I'm not sure I thought much about it. I thought it was exciting, actually. I think if there was any emotion I had attached to it, it was excitement,
Hmm.
because I was finally living the stories that I would hear from all the articles and magazines and stuff.
Mhm.
In terms of crunch specifically, like I remember, I think it was just a few years prior to that that the EA employees' wives wrote an open letter to EA saying that, look, this is insane.
I
Our
remember that.
husbands aren't coming home. Yeah, and I think Rockstar employees' wives also did the same thing. So it was crazy, and to live in that, I was like, oh, so I see what they're saying now.
Hmm.
But then I wasn't married, so
Hmm.
I didn't really have any kind of home attachments at the time.
Yeah, we were
So
just
yeah, I
kind of
was
single and
yeah.
working a lot. And I'm sure you mentioned camaraderie a little bit. I'm sure that during those times there was even more camaraderie because you're just around your coworkers, probably even more than anyone else, even your
Yeah.
friends or your family. And I think that that's I've heard a lot of studios talk about that being a temporary measure that you just have to, especially during the release of the game. Was that
Mhm.
typically during the release of a game? Is that when it started to pick up? Like,
Definitely during release, for
mhm,
sure. I don't think we had any really. I guess later on, after the official releases, and we're kind of just doing
mhm,
um, post DLCs and patches, then things got a little more sane.
mhm.
But leading up to like the 1.0 releases, like 6 months prior to that would be it would be crunch.
Yeah, they start the timer at that point.
Yeah,
Okay. And how was your process kind of? So I assume how long were you there for? At
just about 3 years.
just about 3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that at that point, you had some experience, and I think you mentioned going to a payroll company, right?
Mhm.
I'm sure that was a completely different environment, much more relaxed, um, much more kind of there's work-life balance. Did you ever miss the game industry after you went? Like, was it like a big, how did that feel going from there to the other company?
It felt like, how do I articulate this? I don't know if you've seen or experienced a feeling where you go to a party,
Hmm.
right? Maybe you go to Vegas for the weekend, and every night and every day is just back to back
Yeah.
insane parties, and then
Yeah.
you come back home and it's quiet.
Yeah.
that's
Right.
that's that's what that was like. I
Wow.
was I
Wow.
was I was off work at 5 p.m. The sun was still shining. Like,
Right.
what is this? It
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Yeah.
strange.
Yeah. You come in before the dawn in the other company, and you leave after, and then
Yeah,
now you're walking out. The birds are singing. um,
exactly.
did you feel like the work itself, obviously payroll work is very different than gameplay work. Did you ever feel yourself like a bit, I don't know, maybe feeling lacking in so much, the thing that you wanted to do, or was that just you were like, okay, now I'm ready for this type of work? How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is that's what the computer science degree was preparing me for.
Hmm.
So if I had taken that seriously
Hmm.
and transitioned directly from that into the financial, because like web-based application development is 90% of companies,
Hmm.
right? So, and it's a different paradigm from making games. It's just like the problems you're
100%.
solving are just different unless you're in the DevOps side of making video games.
Hmm.
So I felt like I was starting over. Like I,
Wow.
I don't really understand any of this stuff. And it was an interesting change.
Wow. So we'll transition and talk a little bit about your indie journey.
Mhm.
Talk to me a little bit about how you came up with sainthood. Talk to well, first we'll describe what sainthood is, and then talk to me about how you came up with the idea for it.
Right. Well, Sainthood it's a cozy strategy game about serving your community and growing your faith.
Hmm.
And the reason I created it is, I guess, it's the reason I make the films that I make too. It's just that when it comes to faith-based
Hmm.
in the arts, we kind of have a reputation for low quality and preachy material, or
Yes.
that it's highly derivative of better works.
Hmm.
So I wanted to make something that was, stylish, cinematic, of a high quality, and still shows my faith, prominently.
Hmm.
Kind of like how you see stained glass windows and cathedrals and music and poetry and all
Hmm.
that stuff. Because like I'm Catholic, right? And so
Hmm.
we have a 2,000-year history of being incredible in the
Hmm.
arts. So I just felt like we shouldn't really have an excuse for not
Hmm.
making great products. So that was the genesis of Sainthood. So then it became, okay, how do I make that into a game?
Hmm.
And that's how it started.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting because yeah, seeing that a lot of faith-based products or faith-based art products, games, movies, tend to be almost like, like a sermon. I've had people explain that they feel like it's a sermon. And how do we get away from that into something that's just beautiful and represents how God works through us? And I think we have to make some decisions at some point, saying this is what we are going to do. When we look at, I think the Catholic Church and a couple of other church traditions, they have these beautiful cathedrals, right? You look at, and they have the stained glass windows. That just represents something. And there's a good thing about how our work and our art represents, what we feel inside, right? Yeah. And I think, that can be a big challenge, because as Christians, we want everyone to hear our message, but at the same time, we want to draw them, right? Like how Jesus drew people, rather than just going and scolding them or preaching at them, because they get, they wanted that, they would have already been inside of church, essentially, right? Do you feel like Sainthood is, and this is a classic question, do you feel like Sainthood is a Christian game, right? Or do you feel like Sainthood is more of a bridge between, right, what is just normal games to a faith-based experience? What do you feel like? Where do you feel like Sainthood fits in there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think the answer lies more in the people who play it than in what I have to say. And so when I look at some of the reviews, I've seen quite a few reviews actually that say things like, even if you're not Christian, you should play this because, X, Y, and Z. It gives you a good feeling. It's a cozy game. It has a particular vibe that is relaxing and meditative. And so the Christian thing is the theme and the bonus that you get on top of that. And so I just think that's the answer to the question.
Yeah, it's the experience itself could be representative of something we feel in Christ. Maybe it's the peace or the love, but whatever it is, we could actually feel that in the game. Cozy games, I wanted to touch up on this a little bit. You definitely have a distinct style, and it's beautiful, right? If you guys haven't checked out Satan, I'll put up something on the video, but it's a beautiful, colorful game, right? This cozy genre. What did you feel about cozy? I know that that's kind of popping off right now as far as a trending genre. How do you feel about cozy? Is that something that you were just drawn to? Did you pick it because it was, you knew that it was kind of something players wanted? Like, how did you go about, picking like a cozy game? What does that mean to you?
I think I picked it because it started from a feeling that I had when I was younger. I can't remember how old I was, but I went into a cathedral. My first time in a cathedral, I think it was the Westminster Cathedral in London. And so I stepped in, and it was just this huge space, beautiful stained glass windows. And then mass began, and then this lady came out and started singing, and like my heart just melted. I'm like, what kind of experience is this? And so I've had that feeling inside of me since that day. And so when I created this game, I'm like, can I create that vibe, whatever that I can't articulate what that feeling is, but if I can just portray that on screen, maybe other people can connect with it as well.
That's such an interesting thing, where you essentially base a game or a game design around a feeling, right? Like you felt something when I think you were a teenager, right? Essentially, I would have been
in my early 20s at the time.
Early 20s, okay. And you were designing an experience, a game around that feeling, right? Do you feel like that was hard to capture inside of a game? Do you feel like that feeling was hard to capture, or do you feel like it naturally flowed out of you?
It's hard to. So I know what the feeling is when I see it, and I've seen it. By the way, I've seen it in other places, so I can recognize it when I see it.
Sure.
In terms of recreating it, I mean, like creating anything of decent quality, it's a combination of different things that have to be carefully tuned to create the overall feeling. So there isn't really any one thing I can point to in the game to say that this is what I did. It was just a constant iteration and tweaking of different things, the colors, the UI, the music, all these different things to get to that thing that I was trying to get.
Yeah, and I think the game actually very much reflects that. I think I can see it and I can feel that experience when I'm playing, or even when I'm like seeing like the color balance, right, of the game. Like I'm seeing like, oh wow, these colors are meant to go together to create calmness, right? Because there's, color can do all kinds of different things, but I think like you've really balanced it really well to kind of just create a calmness. What was the development process like? What was your process in developing? This is something that a lot of people love to just know, essentially, like, what is the process of you? Did you kind of start off with your GDD and write it out, or like did you experiment? How was that like for you?
Yeah, there was no GDD. It was really just because this game, because I do so many things, and I think maybe that's a problem. My wife thinks it's a problem, but I started in 2020, just
Mhm.
before the pandemic hit. So I
Mhm.
actually didn't really know at the time I started. I didn't really know the cozy genre was a thing. I think it was until Animal Crossing blew up that same year that it
Yeah.
really became a thing. But I started in February 2020,
Mhm.
and I would kind of just work on it on my spare time. So there
Mhm.
would be several months, 6 months, where I wouldn't touch the game at all,
Mhm.
and then I would come back and add a little thing, and then do something else. Because I was also making films at the time. I was getting some commissions.
Mhm.
I was still working my 9 to 5. So it wasn't until late 2023,
Mhm.
November, December, when Microsoft announced the developer acceleration program.
Mhm.
And so I applied for that, and I got it, and I got financed. And I had a
Awesome.
deadline now of November 2024
Mhm.
to release the game on Xbox. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, now this is serious. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna start lockdown on this.
Yeah. And that's actually pretty powerful because I think yeah having that deadline, at least even an external deadline, is really helpful. I think a lot of people try to target like Steamfest or like a con, and they say, "Hey, I'm gonna try to do this," but having that deadline is super super helpful. So when
Mhm.
did the game actually release? Was it 2024 that it released, or was
Yeah,
it just ready for Xbox at that time?
yeah. It launched on PC and on Steam and Xbox in 2024, November 1st, which is All Saints Day in the Catholic Church.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I really had to hit.
Yeah, the day after Halloween, right? Um,
Exactly.
so this was approximately 4 years that you were working on this game,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I assume part time the whole time. Way.
Yep. The whole way.
Uh, how did you balance that? Did you feel like because I think a lot of people, especially listening, they'll want to know like they're probably opening up Unity after work or something like that, and they're just hacking away and building some small thing. 4 years on a project is a long time to spend, right? But it
Yeah.
also represents that dedication that you had towards the project. Um, how what do you think would be helpful to kind of give towards someone else in that stage right now if you were to go back to 2020? It's a long long period of time. Yeah.
It is, and I'm not sure I would recommend it, to be honest. I think the reason I stuck with this was because there just isn't any real competition. Like there are no comps. Even when I'm pitching this, I can't say, yeah, this is the market, this is the target market of faith-based gamers. These are the other games that have done well in this space. It just doesn't exist. There's no data. So I'm like,
Was that motivating to you?
it was
Okay.
because I just felt like the purpose of this project is to be a data point for somebody else in the future to
Hmm.
have something to compare against. That
Wow.
was that was really the motivating factor to say that yes, there is a high quality Christian game with a cross on its logo
Hmm. Hmm.
that
Yeah.
exists and has good reviews, and it's on Xbox. It's published, it's there, it's live.
Hmm.
And if somebody else sees that and is inspired to make their own thing, then they have something to compare against. They can pitch for funding and investment and say, yeah, this is
Yeah.
this is a comp.
So you were kind of working on this for 4 years and on and off, right? And you wanted it to be not only like a profitable project for you, but you really wanted to kind of put it as a hallmark for even like other Christians. And I think that's actually powerful because being a faith community, I think that we do need to work towards that, and especially set standards for pushing ourselves beyond that. And there's kind of like pushing the medium forward, right? Like if we are all
Hmm.
faith-based creators, we do need to say, hey, look at what I've done. I think we can all push towards that. There's an interesting thing about faith-based creation and Christian creation especially, which is that it's not just a bridge between us and the world, right? It's, if we look at like art, especially during Renaissance, it was a lot of men reaching God, and like
Hmm.
our art was looking towards the heavens and modeling towards heaven. So there's also that element of this is something that I've done as a sacrifice or glory to God, right? And I think that's really powerful to see, right? Like us building products that really represents man reaching towards the heavens, right?
Right.
And building that proper adoration and worship of God. Something. So you said that your game was cozy, and you said that it took about 4 years, which is like um, way more than the average game developer would take.
I wouldn't
For-
recommend it.
I think most of the game developers that I've talked to tend to stick between that 2 to 3 year range, right?
Hmm.
Is there anything that you would say you would have done different if you had to start over right now and try to build a game like this? Is that something like you would say, oh yeah, I would have probably cut off this and done that? Like, let's say someone's starting off a game right now, they're a Christian creator. Um, you know, is there something that you would have done different essentially than what you did?
Yeah, I think a lot of market testing, because at the end of the day, even if you're making an explicitly Christian game,
Hmm.
it still has to fall within a genre,
Hmm.
right? So you still have to pick a genre, whether it's strategy or um,
Yeah.
action or puzzle or whatever. So pick that genre, test the mechanics, and put it out in front of players as soon as you can. I think that would be the thing I would do differently,
Hmm.
because a lot of that time, like, the game plays the same as it did in 2021. But a lot of
Yeah.
that time was just me tinkering and um, iterating on
Hmm.
mechanics and variations, but without any external player feedback. It was just me in my room,
Yeah.
just messing around with stuff. So I wouldn't do that. I would validate it with it. Just I'm just lucky that the reviews are good
Yeah.
because
No, that's awesome.
I don't think that's a good way to make a game. I think you get it out in front of players' hands as soon as possible, and then that's where your iteration should come from.
There's two things you always hear from creators that they say is like test out your game, especially give it in the hands of people and don't say anything, just watch watch them play it and break it, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing is build an audience, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of people when they hear that, they feel I don't know how to do any of that. I don't know how to find people or test, I don't know how to do that. You know, how would you go about like finding people to actually do that? Like what would you do kind of if you wanted to build an audience or, get playtesters involved? Like is there something you would do from perhaps a marketing or that kind of angle to kind of find people to even test your game? Or are you just talking about friends and family?
Yeah, that's kind of the $1 million question. If we all knew how to build an audience, then
Hmm.
that's the key, right? And that's the key, especially with the niche, mom and pop shop independent style of
Hmm.
business, where you're not really chasing the big market. You're just chasing this little group of people.
Hmm.
I don't have a I don't even know if I have an answer to that. I think if you can, if your concept is great,
Hmm.
um, and you participate in a game jam and it does really really well, that's one way to do it. If you develop key art for
Hmm.
your concept, put it on Steam, or do a Kickstarter, that can be another way to validate. Maybe run some ads.
Hmm.
Scroll on Instagram, I see Kickstarter ads
Yeah.
on, with independent folks promoting their projects. So that's a strategy. Yeah, and I guess I just don't think that we should be siloed,
Hmm.
and say just because you don't have the skill set, or you just find somebody, partner with somebody that has that business expertise and can
That's
help.
actually a good segue because the question I was going to ask you next was literally solo versus team. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts about building in solo versus team? Did you build it? I don't know how you built this, but would love to hear your thoughts about that.
It depends, to be honest. I think I'm introverted, so it's difficult for me to go out and, you know, recruit people.
Hmm.
But I did work with the team. I worked with a team of contractors,
Hmm.
and I'm in a few different groups. I'm in Imladris. I'm in a few game development groups back home in Nigeria. And so I would just reach out and say, "Hey, I need a programmer to help me for the next 2 to 3 months to build some tools, and I've got some cash to pay you." And that's how I did it. And so the arts is, contracted out some of the tools that I used to build the game. I contracted that out to. So I still consider myself a solo dev, and I just reach out to get help where I need it.
Yeah, I think there is three things that I see, especially in the indie sphere. One is kind of equal partners building a game, like kind of like
Mhm.
you're, a team. The second is one or two people, and then there's contractors that kind of fill in. If you're one person and you're still having contractors, I still consider that to be solo technically,
Mhm.
because you're still kind of directing the show. And the third one, which is unique, but you do see it, which is you can have a group of employees, like you just hire full-time employees and you offer the benefits and you get them working. And this would be like a Jonathan Blow does this, for example, right?
Yeah.
He might hire like real full-time employees, offer them health benefits and things like that. Um, and there's no like right way that I've found in my interviewing with people or talking to people. I think that everyone kind of falls to the scope of the game, the complexity of the game or their skill set, and see where they need to fit in.
And whether you can commit to it full time or part time.
That's a big one,
Yeah.
big one. But a lot of people have a common theme. and this is something that I just ask everyone, is a lot of people feel left out on the sense of marketing. They feel like they can make an amazing product, but the marketing, they feel like, I don't know. So when you launched your game on Steam, I always wanted to ask, you've obviously made money because I see reviews. You obviously made money. Your game's on Steam, Xbox, and now on the mobile app stores. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Did you do any marketing? What was your marketing like for your game?
Yeah. So the good news and the bad news for Steam and Xbox is, the good news is that you can be successful on those platforms if you tailor your marketing strategy to the strength of those platforms. The bad news is that, well, it's a very difficult thing to do. So for Steam, you have to build. For Steam, if you the formula is pretty simple. You build up your audience first. How you do that? You figure it out. You build your audience and you build up your wish list. You release a demo,
Mm-hmm.
and then you use that to build more wish lists, and then you go into Steam Next Fest, and that would usually 2x, 3x, 4x your wish lists. So by 2x, 3x, 4x, it means that the bigger base you have prior to Next Fest,
Mm-hmm.
the higher the return during
Mm-hmm.
Next Fest. And then when you launch it, like 3, 4x again.
Okay.
And once you do that, once you have, it's like 7,500 to 10,000 wish lists prior to launch, you get on the Steam lists.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like new and noteworthy or new and upcoming or whatever. Once you get on that, that's another like 10, 15, 20x
Mm-hmm.
you get from Steam. So the formula is pretty simple. Everybody knows this formula, but the problem is that the catalyst to build that initial 7,500 to 10,000 wish list is always the issue. On Xbox, it's not as open, so you kind of, I guess, need to have some kind of agreement. Perhaps you have to have a contact with someone on the team. I was lucky. I got into, because I went through the developer acceleration program. We were featured on the emerging creators section of the
Mm-hmm.
store, and so that just was a nice
Kind of,
boost.
yeah, they had a big audience.
Yeah, and then of course, anytime you discounts always, people are always hunting for discounts. So
Mhm.
anytime you discount, you always get another spike. But these are all like store specific deals. Same thing on mobile. If you can get featured, which again, almost impossible for the average Joe, but if you get featured, then you get that nice big boost. Otherwise, I think the only way to do well on mobile is to run ads, like really, really strong, effective ads. And so far, so good for me. It's been working so well.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think you're 100% right. I think marketing is one of those things that's very context dependent. That's like you can only do marketing with this group of people who are doing this. So in Steam, whatever worked on Steam may not work on Xbox or may not work on the App Store, and you really have to tailor those things. And it's not as simple as just upload some TikToks or run some ads. It's not that simple. You really have to think about it. But I do think everything starts with having a great, unique product because you could sell something that's really great and unique. If you're just doing yet another game that's just competing with the sea of games over there, it's hard to market that, right?
Yeah.
But I think like with Sainthood, you have a really unique hook, which is you have actually a couple of them, which is one, the look of it, right? The look of it, and I think the market, the target a market, right, where there's this faith-based Christian kind of service-oriented mechanic. Is that correct? Yeah, and I think that's very unique. I don't know that there's a lot of games that are doing that. So it's actually a very easy hook for you to be able to kind of tap into. But yeah, I think that a lot of developers feel if I just had better marketing, my game would be better, or like my game would just take off, and I would just be able to rake in millions of dollars.
Yeah. So the thing about that is that marketing is really it's a multiplier effect. So it just multiplies whatever product, the strength of the product that you already have.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
So if the product isn't great, if the product is a 1, then a 2x multiplier is just 2. But if the product is a 10, then a 2x multiplier is a 20, and so it just exponentially scales that way. So there's no escaping it. You have to develop something that, if you're targeting streamers, it has to be something, your game has to be streamable.
Yeah.
And, strategy games are a little tough for that because they're not visually exciting. But like systems-based games, any kind of decorating, customizing, any games that are kind of physics-based that elicit laughs, those are games that do well with streaming. So you really have to know like what path you're going on. as opposed
Yeah.
to in the past where I would just make, I just have this cool idea and I just go ahead and make it, and it doesn't do well and I'm kicking myself in the foot.
Let me ask you this. So let's shift a little bit towards kind of your next plans, your next kind of upcoming stuff that you're working on. Is your plan now kind of to kind of keep releasing extra content or ports to Sainthood? Or are you thinking, hey, I'd love to start work on the next project? I mean, you don't have to describe the project if you don't want to, but I'd love
Mhm.
to hear about like what your process is like if you are planning the next thing, what you're thinking through right now.
Yeah, so right now I'm preparing the Android and iOS ports for Sainthood,
Mm-hmm.
and those are its own beasts because yeah, the mobile space is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm also adding um, some extra content to the game, and so everybody gets it right from Xbox to Steam
Mm-hmm.
to now mobile. I added a new prayer in the prayer mode. Some folks on our Discord, yes, we have a Discord. Feel free to join.
Mm-hmm.
Have asked for some features, so that's kind of what I'm spending my time tweaking and doing optimizations
Mm-hmm.
and all of that stuff. Moving forward from that, it would be nice. The grand idea really is to have a company that just produces these types of let's call them faith-based experiences, these high
Mm-hmm.
quality experiences. And I can go in any genre. There's so many genres, even in the cozy space. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
genres that you can tackle. You can and there's so many saints that you can include. We have
Mm-hmm.
2,000 years of their stories and their lives and their works. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
have produced stories that you can also adapt. And so there's so much potential there in terms of IP development. But that all depends on funding and pitches, and so it's a whole other ball game. And yeah,
Talk to
it'll
me
be yeah.
a
Go ahead.
little. Talk to me a little bit about this studio that you want. So, something I always see is people are so passionate when they're talking about their studio. What their plans are, what their structure is. When you say I want to have this indie studio, essentially that's focused on faith. So, what does that look like for you? Like, what gets you excited about that? Like, is that kind of just you by yourself, or are you talking about like a team? Everything. I'd love to
Mhm.
know.
It'll probably be myself as a creative director and a partner who's more a business development or that side of things. And so on myself, it'll be sourcing and developing the IPs, and then my partner would be business development, strategic partnerships, and talking with the storefronts, talking with funders, talking with different partners, and maybe even doing things like live, something I've been thinking about, especially with Sainthood, because it has charity at its heart, serving your community. So like live events where we get to sponsor those things for
Wow.
local communities, so things like that. But so that's to answer your question, that's how I see us running it. But yeah, I would have to have a business partner that is as strong in that area as I am on the creative side.
So you see yourself, yeah, like a studio director, like a creative director, coming up with the IP to pursue, coming up with those kinds of things, and then the studio itself is going to be pursuing some sort of strategic partnership, possibly with churches, possibly with communities, nonprofits, things like that, to be able to do things. But also, you want to keep producing in, I would assume, in the same line of thought, right? Like I think you said, faith-based experiences. Talk
Correct.
about
Yeah.
that. Like, what is a faith-based experience in your mind? I know that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
no, I like to see it as the continuation of the tradition that the Catholic Church has been doing for the last 2,000 years.
Mhm.
So just looking at that history, it's the paintings, it's the Gregorian chants, which are featured in my game.
Mhm.
It's the stories, the poetry, the sculpture, the cathedrals.
Mhm.
It's all of that, and I just think that like video games being a new-ish media format, we have to continue that tradition. And in film too. The thing with film is that I guess the quality is getting better these days. We have
Mhm.
TV shows like The Chosen that's doing very well. There's some animated projects. King of Kings released earlier this year. That's doing really well. A couple more are coming up later in the year. So on the film and TV side, we're getting better. The
Mhm.
video game space is just dead. It's just nothing. Um,
Yeah, and
so
part of this effort, and even in this podcast, is literally to bring more life into that side of things. I think that, especially with the breakout of The Chosen, and we see, I think King of Kings, and I think Light of the World is coming out later this
yeah.
year. there's sort of this resurgence, and I think House of David was also a great,
Yeah.
Prime Studios project. We see that kind of resurgence of things inside of the faith, but we want to obviously bring life to even video games, and we want to bring life to all manners of art. And you're right, this, it is a struggle for the builders that are in this space of video game
Hmm.
developers that really want to provide high quality experience. They want to make amazing games. We want to show that we can make great stories. We can give them great experiences,
Hmm.
across the board, adults, kids, all those kinds of things.
Hmm.
Um, I'll kind of, ask your thoughts about, regarding that, to kind of close out, which is, you know, I sense that sometimes there's this almost antagonism in the faith about games, right? Especially the players, the market, right? A lot of people feel that they don't want their children exposed to games, or they themselves see that as a waste of time. But when it comes to like other things, maybe like movies, it's not as big of a controversial thing. One, do you also see that same kind of dynamic playing out where games are kind of singled out? And two, what do you feel like would be a good antidote to that? What do you think like would be some of the ways that we can approach that as no, games can be helpful. Games can be beautiful and enjoyable, right? As opposed to just
Yeah, I think with every new media format, there's always a hesitancy, especially because the big players that come out typically lead with
hmm
some not so great stuff, and so
hmm
that's what gets into the popular culture. And so, of course, religious parents would be cautious about that,
hmm
and they have good reason to be. There's a lot of violent and sexual content in video games
hmm
today that are exposed to children. They're sold in stores. They're easily accessible. So I can understand it. I think the antidote to that is the same antidotes that the filmmakers have done. Like if you mentioned House of David, that's a collaboration between the Wonder Project and Prime Video, right?
hmm
Prime has hundreds of millions of subscribers, and
hmm
they funded this, co-financed it, and put it out in front of their millions of subscribers. And that just shows the confidence that they have that the product that they're releasing is good enough and edifying enough for families. And so I just think on the video game side, we kind of have to figure that out and
hmm
get out there and show that yeah, the video game space can be scary, but there are points of light
hmm
there, and just making them aware that this is a thing. And that's what I love. That's the thing I love the most about Sainthood is that I see lots of comments saying, "Is this really a Christian game? Like really? Like
right,
this is not a spoof or or a parody or." And I'm like, and I reply in the comment like, "Yeah, it is. Go check it out." And so
yeah,
it's just the awareness. Lots of people just don't know that it's possible. So we have to show them.
yeah, and I think like the way that I kind of think about it is just like how Christ came into this world and redeemed us. Now we redeem right after
Mhm.
Christ, and so this is one of those areas that I think it is our kind of like prerogative. It's our job to redeem it, to the
Mhm.
glory of Christ. There's nothing that's outside of what He essentially rules over. Um, if people want to connect with you, right, what would be the best place to kind of get in touch with you or get your products? I know that I think Sainthood is on Steam, Xbox, and the Apple Store. But if people want to connect with you, do you want to give yourself a quick shout out? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Instagram at my name, Bisong_Taiwo. Uh, you can go to sainthoodgame.com. All the links are there to everywhere you can download the game. And there's a newsletter link as well that you can subscribe to. That I rarely ever publish to, so don't worry about spam.
Okay, thank you so much, Bisong, and we thank you so much for having on the show. This was really fun hearing your thoughts and the way you develop your games and your studio and philosophy. And would love to have you over again sometime. So thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate you coming on. Um, well, guys, that was really fun. Talking to creators like this is really not only enjoyable, but it kind of refreshes our soul, right, as creators and as consumers. If you would like to know where to find Bisong and his content, I'm going to link it in the description. Again, if you like this type of content, if you want to see more creators be featured, right, if you're a creator yourself, feel free to reach out with the email. And if you want to see more, the best thing you could do is, one, if you're a Christian, right, pray for the channel. And two, right, go ahead and like or subscribe, right, because that helps push out this type of content up. But nonetheless, no matter what you guys decide to do with your journey, right? Always, all in all, make sure to remember that Christ is supreme above all, and make sure that we can encourage one another with everything that we do as we reach towards heaven. So thank you guys so much for all the goodness that you guys kind of give, and we appreciate being able to talk to these creators because they're just absolutely awesome, deserve to be highlighted. So thank you again, and until next time, bye.
I'll sing my truth, the final ode to my stolen youth. I'll paint the skies with my wildest dreams and let my heart burst at the seams before I leave this world.